In a small, quiet village in Uyo, where the red sand painted every footpath and hunger danced in many homes, lived a young girl named Tina. She was only 20, but her eyes had held the weight of 100 lifetimes. Since her mother died 3 years ago, Tina had known no peace. Her father, Mr. John, had changed. Once a kind farmer, now a cruel drunkard. And as if that wasn't enough, he married a wicked woman named Mrs. Kemi, who hated Tina with everything in her. They made her cook, fetch firewood, sweep the compound, farm from dawn till dusk, and sleep without food. Everyone in the village pitied her, but no one dared to speak. Nobody wanted to face Mr. John's madness. Then came Joe, a young man from the city. His clothes were old, his shoes had holes, but his eyes were sharp. He had been working on Mr. John's farm for 2 months, clearing bushes, planting cassava, carrying heavy loads from morning till evening. But after all the work, Mr. John refused to pay him. He will be told to come next week, or come tomorrow. I will pay you when I sell something, he kept saying. But nothing ever came. One hot afternoon, Joe came to the house, tired and angry. "Sir, please, I need my money today," he said. Mr. John scratched his head and looked around. His eyes fell on Tina, who was sweeping the compound with a tired face. Then he laughed wickedly. "You want money?" he asked. "Yes, sir. I worked for 2 months, so I need my money." "Please pay me," Joe replied. "Will you take that girl instead?" Mr. John said, pointing at Tina. Joe was confused. "Take who?" "My daughter. She's good for nothing. Let her go with you to the city. That is your payment." Tina's heart broke. She dropped the broom and looked at her father. "Daddy, please." "Shut up," he shouted. "You should be happy someone wants you." Mrs. Kemi folded her arms and smiled. "Good. Let her go. One less of a mouth to feed." Tina fell on her knees, begging, crying, shaking her head. But no one cared. No one listened. Joe looked at her. She was broken, but still very beautiful. Not just on the outside, but something in her spirit touched him. "She's beautiful," he said under his breath. "What did you say?" Mr. John asked. "I will take her," Joe replied. Just like that, Tina's life changed. With tears in her eyes, she packed her clothes inside a black plastic bag. No one hugged her. No one prayed for her. Her little half-brother, Tom, stood behind the house, crying as he waved goodbye. And Tina followed Joe to the city. The journey to the city was long and tiring. The bus passed through many towns, trees, and dusty roads. Tina sat close to the window, staring outside. She wasn't sure how to feel. She had just left the only home she knew, even though that home was full of pain. She had no idea where she was going or what would happen next, but deep inside her heart, she prayed silently. "Lord, please don't let this man be wicked like my father. Please give me peace. I'm tired." Joe didn't say much during the journey. He just kept looking straight ahead, thinking deeply. Every now and then, he would glance at her and sigh. She looked so tired, so small, like someone who had carried too much pain on her shoulders. Finally, they reached the city. Everywhere looked different. Tall buildings, cars with shining lights, people walking fast, noise everywhere. Tina held her bag tightly, trying not to look confused. She had never been to the city before. They took a small tricycle to the end of a quiet street. Joe paid the driver, then led her down a short path lined with flowers. Then he stopped in front of a big black gate. He knocked. A few seconds later, the gate opened slowly. Tina gasped. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The compound was wide and clean. The main house was painted white and looked like something from a movie. Flowers were neatly planted by the walkway, and there was even a small fountain in the corner. They passed the main house and stopped at a small but neat building behind it. It had one bedroom, a sitting room, a small kitchen, and a bathroom. It was called the boys' quarters. "This is where I live," Joe said with a smile. Tina looked around. The place was clean and peaceful. "I just got a job a few days ago as a security guard," he continued. "The owner of the house is very kind. She gave me this place to stay for free. Tina looked at him, surprised. Really? Yes. He nodded. She lives in the main house with her only son. She said I can stay here as long as I keep the compound safe. Tina looked at the small house again. It wasn't as big as the main building, but to her, it felt like a palace. It had a roof that didn't leak, a door that locked, and a bed with clean sheets. It was far better than the mat she used to sleep on in the kitchen back home. She smiled faintly for the first time in a long time. If this is God's purpose for me, then so be it, she said quietly. Joe looked at her. Are you okay with it? She nodded. Yes. I have peace. I've not felt this in a long time. 2 days after they arrived in the city, Tina woke up to the smell of something nice coming from the small kitchen. She opened her eyes slowly and looked around the room. The morning sun was gently shining through the window. It felt peaceful. She sat up and stretched her arms. For the first time in years, she had slept peacefully. No shouting, no beatings, no fear. Just calm. She stepped into the kitchen, and there was Joe, turning something in a frying pan. Good morning, she said quietly. He turned with a smile. Morning, Tina. I made breakfast. Hope you slept well. She nodded. Yes. Like a baby. They both laughed lightly. After breakfast, Joe said, Get dressed. I want you to meet someone. Who? Tina asked curiously. You'll see. Just wear something simple and neat. She went back into the room and wore a soft gown Joe had bought for her. She brushed her hair and came out, her heart beating fast. They walked out of the boys' quarters and followed a short path that led to the main house. When they got there, the tall black door opened, and an elegant woman in her late 50s stood at the entrance. She had kind eyes and a calm presence. Good morning, Ma, Joe greeted. Morning, Joe. And who's this beautiful young lady? This is Tina, my wife, Joe replied. Mrs. Vivian looked at Tina with warm eyes. So this is the wife you spoke about. She's lovely. Come inside, my dear. Tina stepped in carefully, her eyes wide. The living room was neat and shining. Everything looked expensive. Mrs. Vivian held her hand gently. You're welcome, Tina. I like you already. You have a sweet spirit. I'm happy Joe brought you here. Tina smiled shyly. Thank you, Ma. You can call me Mrs. Vivian. Feel free. Okay. This house is big enough for peace. If you need anything, let me know. Okay, Ma, Tina replied. After a short chat, they returned to the boys' quarters. That evening, after cleaning the small kitchen and arranging the room, Tina sat on the edge of the bed, thinking. Joe was seated on the floor, fixing a bad kitchen blender. Joe, she called gently. Yes. Can I tell you something? He looked up at her. Of course. She sighed, playing with her fingers. When my father said I should follow you to the city, I felt useless. I felt like I was thrown away, like I didn't matter to anyone. Joe stood up slowly, his eyes on her. I thought maybe you would be worse than him. Maybe when we get here, you would start shouting at me, beating me, or treating me like a slave. Her voice broke a little and tears filled her eyes. But you didn't. You gave me peace. You gave me space. You respected me. You even cooked for me. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. I want to tell you thank you. I don't regret coming here anymore. I'm no longer angry that my father gave me to you. I now believe maybe this was God's plan. Joe sat beside her and took her hand slowly. I would never hurt you, Tina. That's not the kind of man I want to be. He paused. Do you know something? He added. I liked you a long time ago. The very first day I saw you on the farm. Tina looked at him with surprise. I wanted to talk to your father, but I was scared. I thought he would reject me, insult me, or even chase me away because I had nothing. He smiled gently. But that day, when he told me to take you instead of paying me, I was shocked. Yet deep inside, I was happy. It felt like a door had opened. Tina looked down. I don't love you yet, Joe. I know, he said quickly, and I'm not rushing you. She nodded slowly. But I like how you treat me. Like I matter. Like I'm not a mistake. Like I'm a queen. He smiled wider. That's because you are, Tina. You're a queen. You've just been hidden in the wrong palace. Tina laughed softly, wiping another tear. For the first time, she felt seen, and though love hadn't fully entered her heart, something beautiful had already begun to grow. Respect, peace, and trust. A month later, life was already beginning to shine brighter for Tina. Every day, she cooked in the boys' quarters and tried new recipes. She had even written some meals down in a small notebook Joe gave to her. Her confidence was growing. One sunny afternoon, as she was helping Mrs. Vivian carry some groceries into the house, the woman called her gently. Tina, come sit with me for a minute. Tina wiped her hands and sat beside her. Mrs. Vivian smiled. Do you know Joe told me something sweet about you? Tina looked at her, confused but curious. Ma. Yes. Mrs. Vivian nodded. He said you're a great cook, and I agree. You have been helping around, and I see your heart. You are humble and hardworking. Thank you, Ma, Tina said shyly. Mrs. Vivian continued, my cook has traveled overseas with her family, and now I need someone I can trust to take her place. And I've been watching you closely, my dear. I believe you are the right person. Tina's mouth opened in shock. Her eyes began to water. Ah, Ma, thank you so much. You're so kind. God will bless you. I don't even know what to say. Mrs. Vivian patted her hand. You deserve it, you're a good girl. Still shaking with joy, Tina wiped her face quickly. Ma, can I tell you something? Of course, my child. I've been looking for a way to earn money, not just for clothes or anything else. I want to go to school. I want to further my education and go to university. Mrs. Vivian's face lit up immediately. You want to go to university? Yes, Ma. I stopped after secondary school because of family issues. But I love learning. I really want to go back. Mrs. Vivian reached over and gave her a warm hug. My child, I love education. I love girls that love school. That is a beautiful dream, and I'm proud of you. Tina felt her heart swell with happiness. Thank you, Ma. Thank you so much. As soon as she finished helping in the kitchen, she rushed back to the boys' quarters, her slippers making soft sounds as she ran. Joe. Joe. She shouted with excitement. He came out of the room surprised. What is it? Why are you shouting like that? Joe, you won't believe what just happened, she said, smiling from ear to ear. Mrs. Vivian said I should become her new cook. Wait. Seriously? Joe asked, his eyes wide. Yes. And she said she'll be paying me every month. I also told her that I want to go to university, and she was so happy. Joe pulled her into a hug. That's my wife, my working-class wife. Tina laughed, blushing. Joe, don't start. No. I mean it, he said, holding her hands. You've come a long way. From the village to the city, from tears to smiles, from rejection to celebration. She nodded, still smiling. It feels like a dream. And the best part is the dream is just starting, Joe added. That night after dinner, Tina and Joe lay side by side on the bed facing the ceiling. The day had been long but beautiful. Tina couldn't sleep. So many thoughts were running through her. After a long silence, she turned slowly and looked at Joe. Joe, she called gently. Yes. He replied, still looking up. Can I ask you something? Anything, he said, turning to face her. Tina took a deep breath. Why haven't you, touched me since I came here? Joe blinked, surprised. He didn't expect that question. Tina continued. I mean, we're married. If it was another man, maybe he would have done it the first night I entered this house. Joe sat up slowly and leaned against the wall. His voice was calm. You're right, Tina. Many men would have done that. But I'm not just any man. I didn't bring you here to use you, he said. I brought you here to love you, to care for you, to protect you. He paused for a moment, then looked into her eyes. You've been through so much already. I see the pain in your eyes sometimes, even when you smile. I don't want to add to that pain. Tina's eyes began to water. Joe continued, I want you to be ready. I want you to love me first. Then when your heart is at peace, you can willingly give yourself to me. Not because you feel forced, not because you feel like you owe me. He held her hand gently. I know you've never been with any man before in your life. You've carried shame, rejection, and fear for too long. That night your father gave you away like you were nothing. It broke something inside you. Tina looked down, her heart beating fast. But Tina, you are everything. You are strong. You are special. And when that time comes, when your heart says yes, not because of pressure, but because of love, then I'll be ready too. Tears rolled down Tina's cheeks. She had never heard such words in her life. You really mean all this? She asked quietly. I do, he said. I want you to feel safe with me, Tina. This marriage must be built on love, not fear. She wiped her tears, smiling softly. Thank you, Joe, she whispered. You've changed my life in so many ways. I thought all men were like my father, but you're different. Joe leaned closer and kissed her forehead gently. Sleep well, my queen, he said. Tina lay back down, her heart full of peace. For the first time, she felt truly safe in the arms of a man, not just a husband, but a friend. Just 2 days after Tina started working as a cook in the main house, something strange happened. That morning, she was in the kitchen, preparing Mrs. Vivian's favorite vegetable soup. She had just finished slicing the spinach leaves when the kitchen door opened. She turned to see a tall, handsome young man standing by the door, staring at her. It was David, Mrs. Vivian's only son. He looked shocked for a second, then smiled and said, Damn. You are so beautiful. Tina stood still, surprised. My mom told me about you, he continued, walking slowly into the kitchen. She said you were smart, humble, and beautiful, but honestly, I thought she was just capping. Until now. He placed his hand on the counter and looked at her from head to toe. Wow, girl. You are so damn hot. I think God created you on a Sunday morning. He must have taken his sweet time with you. Tina felt uncomfortable. She looked down quickly and tried to focus on her cooking. Good afternoon, sir, she said quietly, trying to ignore his words. David laughed and waved his hand. Come on. Don't call me sir. I'm just a little boy, you know. You can call me David. Tina shook her head. No, sir. I can't. It's not proper. He smiled again. You're so polite, I like that. She didn't reply. She just continued cooking in silence. After a few more minutes, David left the kitchen still smiling. When Tina finished her work that evening, she returned to the boys' quarters. Joe was waiting for her outside sitting on a wooden bench. Welcome, my queen, he said cheerfully. How was work today? Tina sat beside him, her face a little worried. Joe, something happened today. He turned to her quickly. What is it? Are you okay? Yes. I'm fine. But your boss's son, David, came into the kitchen. Okay. Joe said, watching her closely. He was saying things that made me uncomfortable. He told me I'm beautiful, that God created me on a Sunday morning, and that I should stop calling him sir and call him by name instead. Joe frowned slightly, but then gave a small smile. That David. He's a funny guy. That's how he jokes. Tina didn't smile. Joe, I didn't like the way he was looking at me. Like I'm something to eat. Joe laughed softly and touched her hand. It's okay, my beautiful wife. Don't let it bother you. David is harmless. He just likes talking. He doesn't mean anything bad. Tina looked into Joe's eyes. Are you sure? I'm sure, he said gently. But if he ever crosses the line, just tell me. I'll protect you always. She nodded slowly. Okay. If you say so. He smiled and kissed her forehead. You're safe with me, Tina, always. But deep inside, Tina still felt something wasn't right. There was something in David's eyes that made her uncomfortable. Something she couldn't explain. A few days later, Tina was in the kitchen again, preparing lunch. She didn't know that someone had been watching her from the corner. It was David again. He entered the kitchen slowly and leaned against the door. "You know," he said with a smile, "there's something special about the way you cook." Tina turned and greeted him. "Good afternoon, sir." He ignored the greeting. "Tina. I've been thinking. I don't want to waste time. Let me go straight to the point." She paused and looked at him, wondering what he meant. David walked closer, lowered his voice, and said, "I like you. I mean it. You're beautiful, smart, and hardworking. And I'm not just saying it to flatter you, I want you to be my girl." Tina blinked in shock. "Sir?" He smiled. "Yes. Listen, I'll change your life. I'll send you to school. Not just any school, I'll sponsor you to study abroad if that's what you want. London, Canada, anywhere. I'll give you a new phone, clothes, money, everything you need. You'll never have to struggle again." Tina stood still, speechless. David stepped even closer. "You're wasting your time with that poor security man. What is he doing for you?" "Nothing. I can tell my mom to sack him today or pay him off. Just say yes to me, my love, and your life will never be the same." Tina took a deep breath and stepped back slowly. "With all due respect, sir," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I am not interested." David raised an eyebrow. "What?" "I am focused on my marriage, my work, and my dream to go to school. I'm not going to throw that away for quick pleasure." He laughed loudly. "Marriage? Don't tell me you're calling that thing with Joe a marriage. You should be ashamed. At your age, you should be in school or dating someone like me, not a broke security guard." Tina held her ground, her voice steady. "I am not ashamed. I'm proud of my husband. He treats me with respect and love. He doesn't have much now, but I know one day, God will answer his prayers and make him a wealthy man." David scoffed. "You're dreaming, girl. I'd rather dream with a man who loves me than live a fake life with someone who only wants to use me," she replied boldly. He shook his head and laughed. "You'll regret this." "No, sir, I won't regret it," she said. "If standing by the men who stood by me is a mistake, then I'll gladly make it over and over again." David stared at her for a moment, then turned and walked out of the kitchen, clearly not happy. Later that evening, Tina returned to the boys' quarters. Joe noticed her silence. "My queen, you're quiet today. Are you okay?" he asked. She looked at him, tears quietly building in her eyes. "David came to me again. This time, he made big promises, school abroad, money, clothes, a new life, but only if I agreed to be his girl." Joe stood up slowly, his fists tightening. "He said he can pay you off or tell your mother to sack you just to take me for himself," Tina added. Joe's eyes darkened with anger, but he calmed down when he saw her face. "What did you tell him?" he asked gently. "I told him no. I told him I am not interested. I told him I believe in you, in us. I know one day, God will bless you." Joe looked at her, touched beyond words. He pulled her close and held her tightly. "Thank you, Tina. Thank you for standing by me." She smiled, wiping a tear from her cheek. "You stood by me first. Now it's my turn." That night, they prayed together before sleeping. The next day, Tina woke up early, but her heart was heavy. She was tired of pretending, tired of smiling, when deep down she was uncomfortable. David's words kept ringing in her head. She had tried to ignore him. She had tried to keep it to herself. But now she had had enough. She walked straight to the main house and knocked gently on the door. Mrs. Vivian opened the door smiling as usual. "Tina, my daughter. Good morning. Hope you slept well." "Good morning, Ma," Tina said, looking down. Mrs. Vivian noticed the change in her face and invited her in. "What's wrong, Tina? You don't look like yourself." Tina took a deep breath. "Ma, I came to talk to you. Please don't be angry. Mrs. Vivian sat down slowly. Of course not, my dear. Talk to me. It's about your son, David. Mrs. Vivian looked surprised. David. What about him? Tina's voice was calm but serious. He has been disturbing me, saying things that make me very uncomfortable, promising me money, telling me to leave my husband and be with him. He said he'll send me abroad and give me a better life if I agree. Mrs. Vivian's mouth opened slightly in shock. He even said he'll pay Joe off or get him sacked just so he can have me. Tina added, her voice shaking a little. Ma, I respect you. I respect this house, but I can't keep quiet anymore. Mrs. Vivian sat back and folded her arms. After a long silence, she said softly, Tina, you're a beautiful and wise girl. You deserve a better life. Maybe my son just sees your potential. Maybe just maybe you should give him a chance. Tina's eyes widened. Ma. Mrs. Vivian looked serious now. Look. I'm not saying you should leave your husband anyhow, but just think about it. We can give you everything you want. Education, comfort, even your husband will benefit. We can pay him off to walk away. This is a good opportunity for you. Tina stood up slowly. Her hands began to shake, but her voice remained steady. With all due respect, Ma, I am not that kind of woman. Mrs. Vivian was silent. I didn't come here to sell myself. I didn't marry Joe because of money. I married him because when the world turned its back on me, he stood by me. When my own father gave me away like a bag of yam, he gave me dignity. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't stop. Ma, I'll rather quit this job than be with someone I don't love. I will never betray my husband. Never. Mrs. Vivian opened her mouth to speak, but Tina raised her hand politely. I'm sorry, Ma, but I'm done here. If your son doesn't stop all this nonsense, we'll leave this house. I won't stay where I am not respected. She turned around and walked out quickly, wiping her tears as she marched back to the boys' quarters. After Tina stormed out of Mrs. Vivian's house, her heart was burning. She couldn't believe what just happened. How could a woman like that, someone she respected, try to buy her like a loaf of bread? How could she act like love had no value? She wiped the tears from her face as she walked back to the boys' quarters with strong steps. Her chest was rising and falling. She was angry, hurt, but more than anything, she was sure of one thing. She loved Joe. When she entered the room, she met something that made her stop completely. Bundles of money, plenty of it, right there on the small table in the corner. She froze. Her mouth opened in shock. Joe, what's going on? Where did you get this money from? Joe stood up slowly from the bed, calm and quiet. He looked at her with soft eyes. My love, he said gently, come and sit down. Tina walked over and sat, her eyes still on the money. Talk to me, Joe. What is all this? He smiled. This money, I've been saving it for a long time. Little by little, I plan to use it to start my business. That's been my dream since I came to this city. But today, when I saw the kind of woman you are, when I saw how you defended me, rejected wealth, and chose love, I told myself you deserve better. Tina was still confused, but what has this got to do with me? He pointed at the money again. I want you to use this money for your education. I know how much you want to go to university. You've talked about it every time. It's your dream. So take it. Go to school. I'll be fine. Tina was speechless. She looked at the money, then at him. No, she said softly, shaking her head. I'm serious, Tina, he said again. And I'm serious too, she replied, standing up. No, Joe. Never. Joe was shocked. Why? Tina's voice was full of passion now. This is your dream, Joe. You saved this money with sweat and hard work. You wanted to start a business, and now you want to throw it away because of me. But I love you. And I love you too, she interrupted, her eyes now full of tears again. That's why I want us to use this money wisely. Let's rent a small room outside this compound. Let's start a business together. You can run it. I'll help you cook and manage it. When it starts growing, I'll go to school, one step at a time. Joe stood there, staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time. You want us to leave this house? Yes, Tina said firmly. I don't want to stay here anymore. Not with your boss and her son treating us like we are nothing. We deserve peace. Even if it's small, let it be ours, a shop, a rented room, a new start. That's what I want. Joe walked to her, took her hand slowly, and shook his head in wonder. Tina, you are not just beautiful. You are wise. You are special. You are everything I prayed for. She smiled through her tears. And you are the only man I want. He pulled her close, his eyes now watery too. Thank you for standing by me. I will always stand by you, she whispered. Then came the kiss. A kiss full of real love. Not because of money, not because of pressure, but because of trust, because of unity, because of two people who had nothing but had each other. That night, they lay in each other's arms. They didn't talk much, just silence, peace, and soft laughter. And as the moonlight shined through the window, Tina whispered, our better days are coming. And Joe answered, yes, my queen. Step by step, we will get there together. The next day, Joe was not home. Tina had woken up early, swept the room, and cleaned everywhere. But her heart was still heavy from the conversation she had with Mrs. Vivian the day before. She kept thinking about everything, David's behavior, Mrs. Vivian's offer, and her bold decision to walk away. Just when she sat down to rest, there was a knock on the door. She opened the door and was shocked to see Mrs. Vivian and David standing outside. Tina was quiet. Good morning, my daughter, Mrs. Vivian said gently. Please, Tina, we came to apologize, David added with a serious face. Tina stepped back and let them in. Mrs. Vivian sat down, looked at Tina with kind eyes, and said, we're so sorry for everything, for what my son said, for what I said too. We were wrong. David lowered his head. I was foolish. I allowed pride and bad behavior to blind me. But I see it clearly now. Joe is lucky. You're a real wife. Mrs. Vivian nodded. Yes. He's very lucky to have someone like you. You are special, Tina. Rare women like you are not easy to find. Tina's eyes softened. She sat quietly, listening. We called you our wife yesterday, Mrs. Vivian continued with a soft smile, and we meant it. You are our wife. Tina gave a small smile. Thank you, Ma. I'm not angry anymore. I forgive you. Mrs. Vivian smiled even more, then she said something strange. You are my son's wife. Tina frowned a little. Your son. Mrs. Vivian smiled. Don't worry, my dear. You will understand soon. After a few more minutes, they stood up, hugged her, and left. Tina stood by the door, confused. What do they mean? Later that evening, Joe returned home. He looked tired but happy. She turned sharply. Where did you go since morning? I've been waiting for you. My love, he said softly, there's something I need to tell you. Tina folded her arms. What now? Joe held her hands and looked straight into her eyes. Tina. I'm sorry. She raised her eyebrow. Sorry for what? He took a deep breath. For lying to you. Tina's face changed. Lying. About what? He sat down and said gently, David is not just the landlady's son. He is my younger brother. And Mrs. Vivian, she's not my boss. She is my mother. Tina gasped. What? Joe, you mean all this while he nodded? Yes. I'm truly sorry, Tina. I didn't plan to lie for long. I just needed to know if someone could love me for who I am, not for my money or my background. He looked down, guilt covering his face. I've been heartbroken too many times. Women used to pretend to love me, but they were only after my wealth. They left when I refused to continue spoiling them. Tina sat down, still shocked. You went far, Joe. You shouldn't have done that, she said quietly. I know, my love. You have every right to be angry. Please forgive me. There was silence for a while, then Tina smiled, teasing him. Okay. Fine. I forgive you, but you owe me. He laughed. What do I owe you? You owe me a car and a mansion for lying to me. Joe threw his head back laughing. That's nothing, my queen. Consider it done. Tina laughed too and jumped into his arms. I love you so much, Joe, she whispered. And I love you even more, Dr. Tina to be, he replied, hugging her tightly. They kissed deeply, full of love and relief. The truth was out. No more hiding. No more pretending. The news spread fast. Joe, the poor security man, was actually a billionaire. When Tina's father heard the news, he almost choked on his palm wine. His eyes turned red with shock. He picked his phone and called Tina immediately. My daughter, please forgive me, he said in a humble voice. I was blind. I didn't know God had blessed you like this. Tina was silent. I want your stepbrother to come and stay with you in the city. Things are hard here. Tina sighed and spoke calmly. With all due respect, sir, I forgive you, but I want to stay far away from you and your wicked wife. I'm at peace now. I suffered too much under your roof. Her voice became sharper. If you ever need help for something important, you can call me. But please, don't call me for nonsense, and take good care of your miserable wife. She hung up and dropped the phone. Then she looked up and said, Thank you, Jesus, for bringing Joe into my life. Years later, Tina wore her white coat and walked across the graduation stage. She was now a qualified medical doctor. Joe was the loudest in the crowd. That's my wife. Come here, you beautiful big woman. After the ceremony, he hugged her tightly. I'm so proud of you, baby. You are mine forever. She smiled. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for believing in me, she said, hugging him. Thank you for everything. Honey, you are the world's best husband. He smiled. And you are my forever queen. One peaceful afternoon, Joe took Tina on a quiet drive. They entered a big estate and stopped in front of a huge white mansion with golden gates. Tina looked around. Why are we here? Joe smiled and brought out a bunch of keys. This is your mansion, my queen. Tina screamed. Joe, stop playing. I'm serious. I promised you a car and a mansion, and here they are. She hugged him, laughing and crying at the same time. I also have good news, she said, stepping back. What is it? He asked, smiling. I went for a test last week. I'm 3 months pregnant. Joe stood still, then he shouted, Tina. Are you serious? Yes, she laughed. We're going to have a baby. He lifted her off the ground and spun her around joyfully. God, thank you. I will spoil you and our baby forever. He knelt and kissed her stomach. My baby, Daddy loves you already. Tina smiled with tears in her eyes. From being rejected to becoming royalty. If you enjoyed the story, kindly hit the subscribe button, like and share it with your friends, and kindly drop your comments on the lessons you've learned from this story. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest updates. Thank you for watching.